Get my 6. What's up, everybody? Welcome back to Homesteading Off the Grid. You may have heard a very peculiar type of howl there just as the video started. I've been hearing that the last couple of minutes as I've been sitting here setting up for today's tale, which, by the way, is probably one of the strangest ghost stories you've ever heard because it wasn't supposed to be the ghost story. I was promised I would get one, but nothing quite like this. It took me a while to figure it out. Even all these years later, it's something. But watch behind me because, as you know from so many videos from the past, we never know what, who may or may not appear in the background to listen to this tale as they, or him or her, or he or she have so many others. So, it's at least 10 years or so ago now. There was this very unique little bar slash pizza parlor on a very remote beach on a very remote island in the southern Philippines. And there was a small village there in which I lived at the time. The guy, I've talked about this guy on this channel before. There was an American, an expat. He was a Vietnam veteran. He had gone to the Philippines years ago, had a beautiful wife there, and he had it's like the only pizza parlor for 3 or 4 hours in any direction. He made like a stone kiln in which he baked ovens, and he had a little bar set up. And it was pretty much like the expat hangout of that small community. There was 5 or 6 of us that would go there regularly, have some, slices and eat some pizza and throw back some cold ones and talk about how important we were back in our home countries, which, of course, we always knew was a lie, because if we were so important, why did we leave, et cetera, et cetera. But it's what the expats do. And I go one time, and I had Dearly with me. Daniel was like 2, and he was with the Yaya. Dearly's sister was keeping him so we could go out and get a couple hours away from the baby. And I go in, and there was this older white guy that I'd never seen before. He was like 70-ish, and he was setting off on the far end of the bar, and he had a Filipino guy with him that was probably mid to late 20s, and that was it. They were hanging out by themselves, and then all the expats were over here. And my Dearly went off to hang out with some girls she knew over here. And so I'm talking to my buddies, and I'm like, "Who's that guy over there?" And they're like, "Oh, that's Charles." I'm like, "Should we invite him over?" They're like, "Oh man, that guy, he's kind of a weirdo, man." They're like, he's nice enough, and you can go say hi, but he's just weird. I'm like, okay, well, whatever. I wanted to go meet the guy. Turns out he was an American. I don't know where he was from in America. You'll find out. I'm hearing the howl again. In yesterday's video, many people saw it. 1, potentially 2 dark figures walking around behind me as I was telling my story. So again, I know you're hearing those odd sounds, but continue to look behind me for anything that may or may not show up, some of which may or may not be human. What I go over, introduce myself to the guy. "Hey, I'm Kevin." He says, "Hey, I'm Charles." And he asked me how long I'd been there, what I do. When I told him I was a writer, he threw his head back, he laughed, and he said, and I thought he was going to say, "No, what do you really do?" Which is usually the next question you get. But he said, "Oh, the stories I could tell you. I've had somewhat of a fascinating life, and I could tell you so many stories. You could just sit there and type them while I spoke, and you could publish book after book." And he says, as a matter of fact, he says, "Why don't we get together and do that? I could tell you some stories, you type them out." And I said, "Hey, I'd love to get together and hang out with you and get to know you some, but I've got enough of my own stories up here in my own mind coming out. I just, I'm not going to sit there and type out somebody else's. I'm not a typist. That's not what I do. But, anytime you want to get together, I'm all for it." And he said, "Okay." Introduced me to the Filipino gentleman he was with. He had on. They were both wearing sunglasses, very bright, and the sun was coming in to that side. It was like an open bar right there on the beach. So. Anyway, some time goes by, a couple of months, and I go back. I've been going back, but I hadn't seen that guy again. But a couple of months later, I saw a girl that had been with him that day. I didn't meet her. She was off hanging out with Dearly and the lady girls there, the lady friends, while the guys were talking. But I noticed that she'd come over with him and she left with those guys. So she approached me and she said, "Are you the writer that met Charles a couple months ago?" And I said, "Yeah. Sorry I didn't meet you. I saw you leaving with him. But I'm Kevin." And she goes, "Yeah." She goes, "Charles wants to know if you'll come by, and he says he's got an amazing story he thinks you're worthy of being told, so you can tell it and write it. But he wants to make sure, can you come?" And I told her, I said, "Look, I'm sorry, but I have enough of my own stories as a writer. I don't need to, or I don't even want to go listen to somebody else's and just type it for him." I really was getting the feeling the guy was looking for a typist. So she goes, "Oh, okay." And she goes off. I go over, I'm hanging out with my expat buddies. I tell them about it, and they're like, "Oh, you didn't hear?" And I'm like, "No." "What?" And they said, "Well, Charles is really bad off. He's probably like passing away." And I was like, "Oh, what's wrong?" And they all told me different things. Somebody told me that he had HIV. Somebody told me he had cancer. I heard all these different stories. Some of them told me that the young lady wasn't his wife. She said the guy I'd met was actually his boyfriend, and the girl was the boyfriend's sister or something. Then somebody said, "No, that is his wife, but the wife lets him have this lover on the side, this gentleman I met." Everybody had a different story. So while they're going on and on, gossip is what it is. I'm thinking not about the stories I'm hearing, but I'm thinking, wow, is this guy passing on? And I'm like, how important do I really think I am? I'm joking because when I was back in my country, I did this, and we were not important. If we were that important, we wouldn't have expatriated for all those years or whatever. So I knew I wasn't so important that I might not be able to go spend some time with a guy who might not be around much longer, who just maybe wants to tell his story, and maybe it would flatter him to think I was going to, type it up or whatever. So I went over and I talked to the young lady, his widow, spoiler alert, now widow. And I said, "Hey, I wouldn't mind going and spending some time with Charles and hearing his story, and I'd even write it out, type it out for him." So she told me where they lived, and I said I would be by the next afternoon. Instead of going to the pizza parlor / bar / village drinkery, whatever, I'd go to their place. So she told me where they lived. Went back, told my buddies, and they're like, "Oh man, yeah, just be careful." They said that, he stays in his room. They were saying he was an agoraphobe, doesn't even go out, and that he had moved his wife's family in and they'd taken over. Just crazy story after crazy story. Well, so anyway, sounds like that door is opening up again. I just hope these screaming demons, if they do come through the portal, as they potentially have in the past, they keep it quiet. So anyway, go to the house. It was like a compound. It's not uncommon there where we were living for folks to build like 10-foot walls around their houses for safety purposes. There was a big 10-foot wall over a considerable sized lot, in which, once I was let in through the gate by the security guards, was a really nice house. And I saw these beautiful little Filipino children running around chasing each other. Met, his now widow there. She met with me when I came in the gate. She introduced me to her parents. A lot of her family was living there. Her parents, adult siblings, underage siblings, her adult siblings, children. It was a full house. And I was like, "Hey, where's Charles?" And she pointed me up the stairs, that door. I'm like, wow, the guys were right, I guess her family has taken over, and He never leaves his room. Well, when I got up, knocked on the door, and I hear him yell, come in, and I opened the door, I realized he was the one making out like a bandit. When he had this house built, he had like a mother-in-law's apartment built on up there that went out to a second-story level deck that had a pool. Dude wasn't an idiot. So I go in, and he was in the bed, though. He wasn't out in the pool. He was in the bed, and he was under the blankets, and he looked sick. He looked very ill. And I looked out the window. I was summing it up because I was thinking, why are you in the bed when you're not out there with your buddy? I saw the guy, the Filipino gentleman who had been with him at the bar when we met a few months before. He had on the sunglasses, and because he was outside, and he was wearing just shorts, like swimming trunks, but he also had like this sash, like chartreuse, or like a lime, little lighter than a lime green, just like some sort of sash going across him like this, hanging out there. And I look over, and just before I ask, why aren't you out there, I'd forgotten the guy's name, Young, and I can't believe I forget that name because my wife has a sister who has a husband of the same name, different guy, but Young. Thinking, why aren't you out there with Young, Charles? You're in here in bed. And that's when he says to me, almost as if he was reading my mind, he says, you're probably wondering why I'm laying here in bed instead of being outside by the pool. And I said, well, yeah, that's exactly what well, I think I just heard a door slam again. So anyway, Charles goes on to tell me that he'll be gone within 10 days. My gut told me that I knew what he meant, but of course I asked differently. I said, are you going back to the U.S.? You taking a trip? He goes, no. And he says, I think you know exactly what I mean. And again, I felt like the guy was reading my mind. And he says that he has been suffering an illness, and he didn't tell me anything. I kind of, as I got to know the guy, I came to think that he kept his cards very close to his chest. And since he didn't give very much information, a lot of folks took that to mean that there must be quite a bit he was hiding, and so they came up with quite the exaggerated tales. He said, but I know my days are limited. I give myself 10 days. He says, but I don't mind because, alas, I finally get to spend eternity with my soulmate, Winthrop, his soulmate. I was like, oh. And I just left it at that because by this time I knew the young lady was his wife. And so he looks at me and he goes, and in case you're wondering, no, that's not a former lover. He says, I am madly in love with my wife. And he says, our relationship is passionate in all ways. He said, I'll state that to offset any of the rumors I'm sure your expat buddies told you. And I said, well, yeah, but the stories were so inconsistent, I didn't know what to believe, so I chose to believe none of them, and I'll make my own mind up. He says, I could tell that about you, Kevin. He said, and he used a word that I've used on this channel quite a few times. I just haven't in a while. But it's a word that just until recent years I didn't really understand. He told me that he was an empath, and that he could tell that I was as well. And by that, I took him to mean that we felt sorry for people if something bad happened to them. I had no understanding of what it meant to be empathic, which, boy, I sure do now. So Charles tells me that he could tell I was a fellow empath, and I was real and I was genuine, and so he would like to share a ghost story with me, and that I would have his permission to retell the story or even write it and type it up if I'd like. And I said, okay, so is this something that you experienced? Is it true? Is it real? He says, it's as real as you and I sitting here. It's as true as this moment. And in time, you may come to realize that it's more frightening than you and I, than anyone else involved, anyone who will ever read it. He just spoke in riddles. I thought, what does this even mean? And I'm looking back out the window, and I see Young sitting out there, and he's got his green sash on, and he gives me a head nod, and I give him a head nod. And I look back, and he says, first we need to get to know each other a little better. He says, have a seat. And he says, I want to tell you a story first about my soulmate, Winthrop. And I said, okay. So I sat down, and his wife brought in some drinks. And so he's telling me about, this is when I started thinking, okay, as wise as he came across and as empathic as I now understood him to be, I was kind of thinking he's kind of a lunatic, another word that I like to use around here, because of course it is the title of my most recent novel, The Lunatic. It's available on Amazon in print and Kindle, or from our Etsy store with an autograph from me. The link's in the description box below. Great novel, get it and read it. Now, I was starting to think he was a lunatic, because he was talking about a lot of stuff that I now kind of understand more than I did then, but he was talking about how we're not really physical beings seeking out some sort of spiritual experience while we're in this world, but that we're actual spiritual beings who are experiencing a physical existence for just a time. He's going on and on about how it's cyclical, and this isn't the first time we've been here, it won't be the last. And he said that he had spent this lifetime seeking out his soulmate. And I said, oh, that's your wife? And he goes, no. He says, but there was something about her that let me know I was really close. And since he said he was 70 years old and that's the closest he had ever come, he went ahead and married her. He said he only later understood why he felt so close with her, and that I would understand that when he got to Winthrop. But that was a tale for another day, because he was tired and he needed to have his rest and take his nap. And he sent me away, and I went, and I didn't get anything that first day I'd gone there to get. I was told, but then I remembered, okay, did you really go here to get anything? No, you went here because people are saying he's on his way out of this existence, and you're just kind of trying to spend some time with somebody who might not have anybody else really to spend time with him. So I went back the next day remembering that was the primary reason I was going in the first place, and I just let him talk. And he was talking about when he had gone to the Philippines, and he met his wife pretty early, and they got married in pretty short order. But he said it was about 6 months later that he met his soulmate, Winthrop. He said Winthrop was a sailor. He was a man of the world. He'd been to all of the continents, and he spoke multiple languages. And it's like, where'd you meet this guy? And he says, here in the Philippines. He says he loved spending time with him because they could relate on so many levels that he couldn't with other expats who maybe had only been to their country in the Philippines, or a lot of Philippines that maybe hadn't left their country at all. With Winthrop, they could discuss the way the different breezes around the different countries around the world blew, and talk about how the sunset looks over the Blue Ridge Mountains of Virginia versus maybe the deserts of Iraq or the beaches of the South Pacific. And it was a beautiful story. It was a beautiful tale. And I was like, wow, so is he still here? Is he here now? And he says, alas, he waits for me in eternity, and alas, I'll soon join him. And I asked, did he die? He passed on. He says he did, and it wasn't too long ago. And I said, well, what happened if I'm not being too personal? He goes, alas, this is the tale for tomorrow. Sent me on my way, and I couldn't sleep that night because I was so excited to get back to Charles and hear about Winthrop. I wanted to meet Winthrop. Sounded like an amazing person. So I get back the next morning, and the guard opens the gate, and the guard tells me that Charles had passed away the night before. His wife met me at the door, confirming what the guard had told me, and alas, Charles was no more. I know that rhymes, but I wasn't trying to be funny. Keep watching for movement back here behind me. I'm kind of getting that sixth sense in my gut again that we might not be alone out here. So I never got the ghost story. He had died, and I wish I'd have known him longer than I did. He really seemed like an interesting guy. And I was leaving, and as I was going out the gate, somebody brushed past me, and I caught the guy out of the corner of my eyes, and I looked over, and it was Young, and he was dressed. He had on a t-shirt, and he had on his green sash, and he was going inside, and he was smiling, and he looked happy, and I was like, well, I guess Young doesn't know yet. He's not going to be so happy here in a minute. So I kept going down the street. They shut the gate. I went down maybe 40 or 50 yards, and there was this little business there on the right side of the road. They call them calendarias in the Philippines. They basically sell food, like made-to-eat prepared food, and booze and cigarettes. So I stopped to get a cold one to kind of let my emotions process a little bit before I went back home. Now, while I'm sitting there, and I'm in these things, they're like closets. They're not very big rooms, but they go back deeply, and you're back there. It's dark. You're in the shade, and it's so bright outside. I'm looking outside, and for the life of me, I could have sworn I saw Young and Charles going down the street. Young still dressed as he was before, and he had that lime green sash on, and Charles just dressed casually like he usually dressed. And I shouted at him, and then I thought, that can't be right. And I had just started drinking my cold one, so I wasn't under the influence. I ran out and looked down the street. I didn't see him. I looked back towards the house, and I just, something was telling me, go back to the house, go back to the house. So I went back to the house, and I asked the guard, I said, where's Young? And the guard says, no, why you say that? I said, where's Young? Did he leave yet? I thought I just saw him with Charles. He goes, why you say that? Why you say these mean things? He goes, you go. And I didn't understand that. I was like, well, that's weird. And I guess I thought, well, maybe the guard was really close with Charles and he's upset by this. So I ended up going to back to the expat hangout that evening. And of course, by then everybody had known that Charles had passed on. So I told the guys about this really weird experience I had about seeing Charles and Young. They're walking past the Calendar, and then about going back and about how the guard got upset. And so these guys are looking at me like I'm joking again. And I said, you guys are looking at me like I'm joking too. What is it that I'm missing? And they said, the only Young that we knew would have been his wife's brother who died about 2 months ago. I'm like, what? How did he die? And they said he got hit by a jeepney. It's one of the main form of public transportation in the Philippines. Busy streets. Young walked out in traffic. Jeepney driver was counting his money in between his fingers instead of watching where he was going, and hit him and killed him. And I was like, oh my gosh, I had no idea. And they're like, did you never meet Young? And I said, no, I don't guess I did. And then the one guy said, well, no, he wouldn't have, because Young had been out at sea. And my ears perked up. I'm like, out at sea? I'm like, what, was he a sailor? And he goes, well, he was a seaman. He had gone to the Mariner College in that community, and he would go out to sea with shipping vessels 9 months out of the year. And then 3 months out of the year, he would get to be home. And the guy further told me that was like the only sibling of Charles's wife. Charles had never met. Charles and his wife had gotten married while Young was at sea. When Young came back, Charles had been married to Young's sister for a few months already by the first time they met. And the guys were telling me that they thought Young was his lover because it's almost like he forgot about his wife and was going everywhere with the brother. And then the other guy says, yeah, he goes, I remember that time. Remember you used to make him wear that lime green sash like this, and you'd see him fixing it at the bar for him. He'd say, no, come on, you've got to have this the right way. You've got to be properly dressed to look like a proper sailor. And I was like, yeah, that green thing, it had to be Young because I saw him wearing that thing. Anytime I saw him, he had it on. Except, he might have had it on the first time I met him. It just... They said, there's no way you saw that either, dude. They said, you really need to stop doing this, and you better not do this around any of their family members, or we're going to give you a beat down. And I'm like, what is it? And they said Charles demanded Young be buried with that green sash, and he was. Charles promised me a ghost story, and he said that once I understood what exactly the story was, that I would realize that it was more terrorizing for me and him than anybody else who would ever hear it. Hope you enjoyed it. Hope you join me for more next time.